for this morning discussion titled Disinformation and Indonesia's 2019 elections. Before we start the discussion, I would like to invite Ibu Dr. Medellina Hinedio, our Deputy Executive Director, to give her opening remarks.
Thank you, Pak Vidya. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CSIS. Today we are going discussion on Disinformation and Indonesia's 2019 election. I think it's not only the topic is important, but also relevance considering the current situation that close to the presidential election. And I heard Pak Ross has also published a book, I think has been launched several days ago, so I think he also could share some of interesting things from his book to enrich this discussion this morning. We also would like to inform you that CSIS currently is also conducting and also interesting on the topic of post-truth and also about the disinformation. So I think this discussion is also important for our study, but also we hope that also will be useful for you all. So without further ado, I think I'd like to open this discussion and give back the time to Pak Vidya. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Medellina. Like what Dr. Medellina has mentioned, I think the topic on disinformation is very, very important and timely as well. Disinformation could also be said as a global phenomenon and also an ongoing issue, especially with the development of advanced technology. So I think the country, Indonesia, or globally, even domestically, is facing some sorts of outbreak of disinformation, and people now are struggling to contain it or find ways, effective measure to solve or even mitigate the impact. Now, it's quite true that the information tends to harm Indonesia's democracy process. I mean, it really resembles practice of bad politics, especially with the rise of conservatism, growing intolerance, and respect of minority rights. The spread of hoax will only exacerbate the already existing tension in the society. And people tend to connect the increased rate of disinformation to Indonesia's election in April. It's debatable. I think Isabel will talk more on that. And I quote data from Mavindo that in 2018 alone, there were 997 hoax which spread in the society. And from that number, 488 hoax are politics in its nature. So another interesting data from Political Wave also mentioned the top ranks of hoax in FB or Twitter, etc. For example, the Ratna Sarumpait case, which was burst by 750,000 accounts, followed by the government note debt of 2 billion, 7 container of votes, Jokowi as communism, Jokowi as using foreign consultant, Jokowi false high school certificate, 10 million foreign workers from China, and Ahok will replace Maruf Amin. So that's top 10 hoax that's been spreading around lately. So I think now the big question is, how significant does disinformation affect people's vote-filtering behavior or influence the candidate electability? We have Mas Kodari here, who could share his experience, and also how significant is the information in polarizing the society. I'm honored to have 3 distinguished speakers, panelists this morning. On my far right is Mas Setiaji Eko Nugroho, he's a Ketua Mavindo, Masyarakat Anti Fitnah Indonesia. And on my right is Ross Tapsell. He is a senior lecturer and researcher at the School of Culture, History and Language at the Australian National University, College of Asia and the Pacific. And on my left is Isabel Dunstan. She is an academic Asia Fellow in Chatham House, United Kingdom, such a prestigious research institute in the UK. So our seminar title this morning is Disinformation and Indonesia's 2019 election. It's such a big topic, and we all obviously could talk about many things, but I think the 3 speakers will focus on, among many others, format of disinformation on a day-to-day basis, impact of disinformation, and of course the coping mechanism of disinformation. Please free to explain among the 3 topics. Okay, without further ado, I would like to, for the order of speakers, I would like to invite Mas Aji, and then will be followed by Ros, and lastly by Isabel. Mas Aji, what is yours?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. It's very we are very pleased to be here. I'm very thankful to be present here. And for my presentation, I will talk about the nature of mis or disinformations in Indonesia, and we call it hoax. Although we know exactly that the hoax terminology is not very accurate, but it is very popular one. I mean that we still use it anyway for our branding issues. Because if we call it a mis or disinformation, people still try to think a lot. I mean that, but if we try to say hoax and then, oh, this is hoax, this is something bad, something like that. So this is the title, is the hoax in Indonesia, and I would like to first of all I would like to introduce the Mavindo, if maybe you are not very familiar with, in a very short time. So we are actually a kind of a community, a grown-up community, people that are volunteers that are collected together with one aim to eradicate the misinformations, disinformations, hoax in the social media. People that are very keen to, you know, that we lost our friendship, our in our family, that we try to, we lost our friendship because of this a lot of disinformations. And we grow until now. We are being part of the IFCN signatories. Indonesia, I think we have 5 signatories of International Fact Checker Network. The first one is Tirto, the second one is Vietnam. We are the third with Tempo and Kompas. So being there, and then now we try to leverage our efforts to combat the misinformations. We are having a lot of volunteers, more than 300 volunteers around more than 16 cities around the nations. So we deal not only fact-checking, but we also do the ground efforts like education, literacy, going to the schools, to the mothers, and to the mosque, to the church, or something like that. So we have a good collaborations with some kind of social media enterprise like Google, Facebook. We have weekly programs with TVRI, like called Verifikasi Viral on Tuesday evening, and we have good collaborations with AJI, the AMSI, also the Indonesian Police, and also of course the Ministry of Communications and Informatics. So I would like to start with telling about the nature of misinformation in Indonesia. The first one is actually the misinformation dealing with the social, religious or ethnical issues that already happen in Indonesia. We know that in India, in Myanmar, the misinformation already cost many lives, but in Indonesia we also have that. For example, issues for child kidnappers, using this kind of digital poster already create a kind of mass panic, and we have in our records 3 people already died because of the mobs that triggered by this kind of digital poster that try to make people afraid that there are a lot of kidnappers posing as beggars, crazy people, something like that. Yeah, this is kind of information that spread widely in the social media. Posted like a victim of the child kidnappers that put the organ, something like that. And this is the impact. This is I think the last impact that we seen on November 2018 when people in Kendal in Central Java got killed because he thought to be one of the child kidnappers. And the second one is actually related to health issues. This is also concerning us very well because a lot of even highly educated people still being trapped into this kind of issues. Just like this very simple issues. People that get stroke and then some way to relieve him is actually to pinch with the needle. And we have actually several reports that already people died because believed to this kind of methods. And I think this is kind of tip of iceberg. A lot of people that are paying. I mean, the health issues are problematic because of lead to believe something like this. And the second one about the anti-vaccine. A lot of misinformation concerning about the anti-vaccine, so it only triggers the anti-vaccine movement in several regions. We see a lot of rejections from people in different regions, like in Aceh, in Riau, in Sumatera Barat, in Kalimantan Selatan, and then we already seen the epidemic because of the rejections, like rubella epidemic in Kalimantan Selatan, diphtheria epidemic in Sumatera Barat, and even actually, this is a kind of some people still believe that he is the kind of the physician, super physician from United States that are anti-vaccines. This kind of silly information is actually spread very well. I mean that. This kind of 400 shares, but others are maybe 1,000 shares. Aceh is already declared that they are going to face a tsunami of rubella because of the very low immunizations programs there. Of course, we have problem with financial hopes that trap people into a lot of money games. But I think today we are going to talk mostly about the political hopes that already degrade the quality of our democracy. I think most of you are familiar with this kind of misinformations. 7 containers of ballots already being punched in the Tanjung Priok. It's circulated widely in the social media and then being transformed into mainstream media. And this is the Cepong Kampot problems. Yeah, I think Ross will going to talk more about these polarizations. But this is the situations that we have. The polarizations, the hate speech, the hateful situations is a very easy to be to fuel the spreading of the misinformations. Just like people said that, wow, the children are afraid with Jokowi because when Jokowi going to their class, they just hit, under the table. Yeah, but actually it is a kind of simulation of an earthquake. Yeah, of course they have to do something like that. Yeah, but the information in the social media sometimes the pictures and the captions are sometimes pretty different. And also Prabowo also got a lot of attacks in the social media, something like this. He got a stroke attack, And if you see from the president debate last 17th of February, one day after that, this kind of two misinformations are spread widely. This one is very serious. I mean, a lot of people actually believe this, that Jokowi used the 8th hearing, I mean that to help him to answer something like that. And some people make a kind of a sarcastic post that Prabowo also used the Google Glass, yeah, to help him answering the questions, yeah. But I just want to say, that this kind of a situation is not only happening in Indonesia. It happens also in France in the presidential election in the 2017. So Macron was also accused using also hearing aid for the presidential debate. So I would say that in terms of democracy, Indonesia is now similar to France. Yeah. And the next one is actually Indonesia is still plugged with terrorism issues, and then terrorists, they are also using the social media to amplify their efforts, for example, to delegitimate the law enforcement. When we had a bomb in the Surabaya last year, and then in social media, people are afraid to go outside because a lot of issues, the bomb are also in Jakarta, in Semarang, in Yogyakarta, something like that. We also have a lot of other misinformations on disaster. I think last year we had quite big disasters in Palu, in Lombok, and the misinformation also creates a lot of problems, and that can kind of problematic for relieving efforts. Then I would like to talk about how we do a fact checking, and we will talk about the number, what we have found. So we start from here. We start from a very simple Facebook group called Forum Anti-Fitnah, Hasud and Hoax. This is a kind of our kitchen for making these fact-checking efforts. So we use the Facebook group, and now we have more than 60,000 members daily doing the fact-checking for issues that are related to people, I mean that make a concern for people. After we finish make a discussion, and then we make these publications here in the turnbackhoax.id. So this is our main database. And then now we also have a collaborations with 22 online medias, now 24 actually. So we start with 22, we call it Cek Fakta. So this is kind of, we call it gotong royong or crowdsourcing or gotong royong to make sure that if any issues that problematic to the people, and then we can get the answer as soon as possible and have the delivery as much as possible. Because our problem is actually, hoax spread 6 times faster than the clarifications. When we see the hoax spread 10,000 times, then it is very, very fortunate for us if we can get the clarification spread 1,000 times. So 10% is very good number for us. So this is kind of, delivery is still a problem. So this kind of effort is hopefully that could help us on tackling the delivery. This is the website, and we also released the apps in the Play Store, Android, and also the iOS in the next couple of weeks. This is kind of tools that help people to check and also to report. So using this kind of environment that we built, then we have the number. Yeah, for example, we start that the number of hoax that we receive is increasing from year to year. From 2015 that we have less than 20, now 2018 we have more than 70 to 80 hoax per month. Vidya already said that in 2018 we released the report that we found 997 hoax, and half of them are related to political issues. We try, because we are actually a small community, so at the beginning we didn't start to understand the importance of data analysis. But since the July last year, we start making a data analysis of the hoax that we collect, and then we have a kind of good information about what happens in the last second semester of 2018. So this is the number of the hoax spread in the social media every month, and the topics. What are the topics that are spread mostly in the social media and chat apps groups? As you have already told, I guess that the first one is about politics, and the second one is about religious issues, and the third one is health issues, and the rest is other mix about disaster issues, about infrastructure issues, about other issues. And the type of content that people see mostly also in the second semester of 2018. So we have most of the this information are coming in the form of combination between picture and narrations. This is the number one of the type of content, followed by only narrations, and also with the third one is the video and narrations. Yeah, but actually today we are going to release the data for the mapping for the January and February. The number of the video and narration is increasing. So people are getting sophisticated spreading these misinformations. Not only picture, but also adding more videos. And what are the platforms? What are the channels to distribute these misinformations? So what we found is actually Facebook is always number one. Facebook is mostly number one, between 20 until even more than 60% every month. And if we collect it all together in the last second semester of 2018, so we have 47% more on Facebook, followed by WhatsApp and also Twitter. But keep in mind that the number in WhatsApp actually could be much higher because of this private nature. What we are collecting is mostly misinformation coming from social media, which are mostly open or public space. So we are quite afraid that situation like in Brazil, that the use of using the WhatsApp group for disseminating the at the moment we still don't know about the situation exactly on the WhatsApp environment. And half of the misinformations are actually about the politics, more than half actually. And this is if you talk about the target, so every month last year we have kind of various numbers of the hoax that target the candidates, even the government, the political parties, even significant persons. Significant persons are actually people that are not competing, but they are being targeted and they are being perceived as one of the supporters of this kind of candidates. I would like to make a kind of a summary that 2018, the most targeted one is actually the presidential candidate number one with 75 hoax or 28%, followed by the government. But actually, because of the presidential candidate number one is the incumbent, some of this kind of misinformation attack the government is actually also giving negative impact to the candidate number one. And also the significant persons is number three, and then the president candidate number two is having around 20% of misinformations. And then followed by political party with 3.4% and regional government with 1.5%. And of course the misinformation concerning the regional government, sometimes related to the contestation of the presidential elections. For example, people are now attacking DKI because they would like to attack the number 2, for example, and they attack, for example, Central Java if you like to attack the number 1. So I think that's all of my presentations. Hopefully it can bring you to understand we can understand all the situations in Indonesia. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mas Haji, for bringing up the multi-dimensional aspect of hoax and also bring up the statistic. But I think it's also important in this case, despite all the measurement that you've made, is how to bring the trust of the people to believe on this counter-measurement of hoax, where I think we're talking about credibility as well, and also how to bring the people's interest to check on fake news. I think that's another challenge that we must face in the near future. I would like to now invite Ross.
Okay, selamat pagi and terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much to CSIS for hosting this talk. It's wonderful to be able to speak here, and of course thank you all for coming. A packed room, which shows that this is a really interesting topic. Thanks to the panelists as well for their work putting this together. Let me start by saying I intend to be highly controversial. I expect that the panelists will not agree. I expect that most of you in this room will not agree with this. But my point here is to, I guess in English would be to throw the cat amongst the pigeons. I'm not sure how that would translate to Indonesia, like lempar kucing dalam burung or something. I don't know, but it doesn't quite have the same ring to it when it's in Bahasa. But I intend for you to disagree with me, and let's have plenty of discussion and debate afterwards. Because if you're going to give a talk, at least try and be controversial. And my point here is perhaps in contrast to what others at the panel might say. But I think at the my focus is purely on the 2019 elections and politics. I'm not talking about the vaccinations or terrorism and various other things like that. And my point here is that the 2019 elections are currently operating in a peculiar paradox. On the one hand, you have little to distinguish Prabowo and Jokowi. The debates have been boring. Prabowo has run a very timid campaign where he is reluctant to criticize the president. Most Indonesian journalists and indeed foreign journalists are saying there's nothing particularly interesting going on. There's no fervent ideological debate between the two candidates. And there's no clear contestation around what is the future direction of the country. In fact, the most prominent material so far which has been distributed in this campaign has been a fake candidate pairing encouraging citizens to golput or Aldo, apparently because the current options are so unpalatably similar. On the other hand, Indonesians are describing the current political climate as deeply polarized. Agus Yudhoyono just last week said Indonesians need to fight political divisions, escalating tensions around the upcoming election campaign. The KPU just last week said that they needed to form a peace committee around the debates. In case someone got personal during the debates, you can lapor to the KPU on the Komite Damai. One university has asked me to give a lecture and said don't talk about politics or the election because it's a sensitive topic, because students cannot be controlled and they cannot agree to disagree. At the lecture I gave in Malang, one student asked me, how can Indonesia achieve peace in this current troublesome, urgent political climate? So what drives this stark differentiation between a tame election campaign and the way many people feel about it? And I think the answer to that question is that social media discourse makes us all perceive polarization is greater than it really is. And politicians are encouraging this. And I think this is bad for democracy. Now, let's go back. because I was going to talk a little bit about my book, but I won't sell the book because the publisher couldn't make it, so I can't sell any copies anyway. So let's go back. Now, I'm not saying there has not ever been polarising campaigns in Indonesia. 2014 was a polarising campaign. Prabowo and Jokowi were fervently opposed ideologically in terms of their campaign messages. People changed their Facebook pages to "I stand on the right side." The campaign caused serious friction in many family and personal relationships. And the right side in this case was defined as a meritocratic leadership, given that Jokowi worked his way from local mayor to become governor of Jakarta to eventually president, versus Prabowo, who was seen as the former military figure and New Order general. Now, in one example, which you probably all recall and remember, the Jakarta Post ran an editorial endorsing Jokowi, saying there's no such thing as being neutral when the stakes are so high. Rarely in an election has a choice been so definitive. The Post argued that Jokowi was determined to reject the collusion of power and business, while Prabowo was embedded in New Order style of transactional politics that betrayed the spirit of reformasi. You were all there. You saw Jokowi campaign with human rights victims of human rights. You saw Prabowo talk about wanting to turn back the 1945 constitution. And so there is no doubt that even though Jokowi may have disappointed these activists from 2014, the polarisation was there in 2014 in terms of campaign messages. 2017 Jakarta election was undoubtedly a polarising campaign. Official and unofficial campaign material, how do I go across here? Oh yeah, just click the next one. Official and campaign material was clearly based around the issue of race and religion, and Islam as the focal point, and even the rejuvenation of the term pribumi. And digital media was a key space for this, to discuss these ideas. You can go to the next one. There's some research that I did from 2017 on what was being said on WhatsApp. WhatsApp was increasingly and incredulously part of the discussion of a polarised election campaign. Middle-class Indonesians recalling incredibly about how in their family or work WhatsApp groups people disagreed with each other and someone left the WhatsApp group. Scandalous. They left the group. I mean, how not very sopan. So that was others explained how you could not talk openly because it would lead to segregation in religious communities. Melina Lim described the 2017 social media discourse as the freedom to hate. Add to that the rise of hoax news, campaign hitam, buzzers, Indonesian political parties have created aggressive discourse. Thus, Indonesians have survived two polarising elections where debates were fervent, particularly on social media and online. As 2019 came around, it is no surprise that everyone is a bit wary and weary of another contested election. As Prabowo once said, democracy makes us tired. But is Indonesian democracy currently having a power nap, or are we sleepwalking into something different? I think we're sleepwalking into something different. And this is because the language of war is often used when describing the social media environment. Indonesia is seeing weaponization of online armies, cyber warriors. Everybody's calling this a hoax emergency. Most notable was Jokowi's comment that we have Russian-style propaganda, where people don't worry whether it causes divisiveness in society. I don't know the next slide is. Oh yeah, let's look at this. Citing extraordinary cases, other docents in Indonesia have said social media discourse is a one-way heaven issue or a fight between good and evil. Indonesians are irrational and tend to be emotional when it comes to politics, and again goes back to this idea of we cannot talk about the election publicly, and indeed I think even Vidya started with the concerns that he has around what disinformation is doing to the country. I think a lot of this comes from looking too much at the United States and comparing Indonesia to the United States. In fact, Agus Yudhoyono just said last week, if this situation continues, he warned us, it will put an end to the country's multi-party system and will lead our country into a two-party system like the United States, which is not suitable for Indonesia's history and diverse society. The National Police Chief last week said, Deputy National Police Chief, said last week that disinformation happened in the 2016 presidential election in the United States, and it's happening to us here too. In fact, one political campaigner who works on disinformation told me US election was crucial to thinking about how she operates. She said, when Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high, it didn't work. Trump won. So when they go low, we go lower. And that, I think, is partly the concern here. We're comparing Indonesia to the US, and people are looking at the US and saying we're going to have a very similar election. There have been a number of studies around polarization in the US, very professional and very well done. We haven't really done enough studies here in Indonesia about whether there is distinct polarization. I think a lot of the polarization, as you can see from Ismail Fahmi's slideshare, which he shared with me just last week from Drone Emprit, a lot of the polarization is manufactured by buzzers. It's manufactured by campaign teams who are paying candidates who are paying PR executives who pay buzzers to create a fake polarization. Now, why do I say this is fake? Because despite all of the concerns about division, disinformation and hoax news, the polls haven't changed. Jokowi has led at 55% for the entire campaign. Prabowo has been around 32%, 35% for the whole time. So whatever is being created, whatever is being thrown out as Jokowi, students have to hide under the chair, Prabowo is, recreating some situation like in Syria. I've seen all the crazy hoax news stuff. The polls haven't changed. So rather than creating a hoax emergency, it seems that the two online armies are actually just cancelling each other out. And young Indonesians are increasingly moving towards Instagram, which is more apolitical, more photos, less discussion, less politics, and less fear that people are going to get personal and hence leave the WhatsApp group. I don't agree with this, but as one of my colleagues, academic colleagues, Indonesian academic colleagues told me, the Nurhaldi Aldo golput phenomenon isn't because people want a better candidate, it's because people don't want to contest. They'd rather joke about politics on social media than get into serious debates about it. So, my general point here, I think if we go to the final slide, thank you, as I start to conclude. My general point here is that 2014 was a polarising election. But Jokowi, and that was polarised around Prabowo as a New Order figure and Jokowi as a Democrat reformer. You can no longer argue that. Jokowi is clearly not the face of a reformist Democrat. Tom Power in New Mandala recently described this as Jokowi's authoritarian turn. Jokowi has also managed to get most of the political parties on side, has most of the mainstream media supporting him, including those who were critical of him in 2014, and has approached a more aggressive agenda through cracking down on controversial and opposition figures. So we can't say that this is a rerun of the polarisation of 2014. Is religion still a polarising factor, which I'm sure many of this room will say, yes it is. I disagree. I think Vedi Hadiz sensibly argued, again in New Mandala in 2017, that there was an emergence of two contesting conservative groups in Indonesia. A radical conservative Islam, or conservative Islam pushed by Prabowo and the 212 and his allies, and a conservative militarist nationalist group pushed by Jokowi and the military. So there was a contestation in conservatisms, Islam versus the military. I don't think you can even distinguish those candidates on that anymore. As Jokowi has shown by appointing Maruf Amin as his vice president, and in many other facets of politics, consensus is now the norm. Ridwan Kamil made this clear in Bandung when he ran for West Java governor. He said, in an interview with me, he said Indonesian perception about politics is always divided in Islamic image and nationalist image. So if the combination comes from both, people consider it a balance. People consider me as nationalist, which means I have to find a vice candidate that has an image which is more from Islam. Prabowo's party, meanwhile, has declared if they win, everybody will be invited into the coalition. And so far, the most popular contestation on social media has been #GantiPresident, which isn't an ideological debate. It just says, let's change the president. There's nothing ideological about it. So, you might think this is weird, and you might think that this is crazy that I'm saying this, but it's weird to be arguing for a more polarized election, which is what I seem to be doing, right? And you're thinking, no. And most people would say a peaceful, stable, even boring election where the incumbent president is re-elected easily is a far better option than Brazil or the Philippines or America. So maybe Indonesians will be happy to see that there's not much contestation ideologically at the moment. But I think this idea of huge polarization created by social media discourse is a way for politicians to reduce contestation, to reduce ideological debates, and to limit direct policy discussion around the future of the nation. And so therefore things aren't so great for democracy in Indonesia in this part either. Now, there's still a month to go, and I might be wrong. And 2024, we could see another polarised election. But so far in this campaign, I think we're missing something essential to democracy, and that's an ideological contestation around policy differences and future direction of the country. Yet somehow, everyone seems afraid of a real contest. Hope that was controversial enough for you. Look forward to hearing your comments afterwards. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Ross. But I think the damage has been done. Polarization it's occurring. We're not only talking about the election, but what happened after the election. And you can see the spiraling effect of the Jakarta government election. It is over, but the spiraling effect still exists. And the two sides of the conservative and the moderate Muslim, I think that's true, based from CSIS research to that bit. So it's the conservative 212 versus the moderate and the moderate. Yeah. So hopefully that confirms. Of course, still debatable. Okay. Now, lastly, I would like to give the opportunity to Isabel for her presentation.
Terima kasih banyak semuanya. Nama saya Isabel. I am an Academy Fellow with Chatham House based in London, also an Australian, with my fellow panellist Ross, and also thank you so much to my panellists here today. It's been a very interesting discussion so far, contextualising the nature of disinformation in Indonesia. It's great to see some examples, and also the work of Mafindo is really impressive. What they've done and achieved in the last 2 years, I think, is wonderful. And Ross's analysis, I hope you all feel sufficiently provoked and inspired. So thank you so much, and thank you also to CSIS for having us here today. So today, at risk of comparing Indonesia to America, I'm not doing that whatsoever, but I would like to take a step back to 2017 as a way to look forward. So when researchers of the University of Washington produced a photorealistic video of Barack Obama, media and information policy makers panicked. It was a wake-up call to say that artificial intelligence is developing at such a pace that existing policies to combat falsehoods, disinformation, fake news can't possibly keep up. New ways of anonymously weaponizing information to manipulate political discourse, sway public opinion and behavior will emerge in time. So we call this deepfakes, or synthetic media as it's otherwise known, and it can't be taken lightly. He looks a little bit waxy in this video, so you might be able to pick that he's not real, but you're able to program what Barack Obama is saying, and this technology is developing at a fast pace. So,
Globally, other wake-up calls that we have seen have jolted policymakers, including a recent report illustrating the extent to which Russia's Internet Research Agency manipulated social media during the 2016 US presidential election. In addition, disinformation campaigns in Syria and the MH17 aircraft in the east of Ukraine and chemical weapons in the Salisbury attack have also proven extremely damaging effects on public understanding of actual events. They've influenced elections, referenda and peace processes, having significant impacts on public trust in institutions and democracy. And close to our region, we've seen viral disinformation causing offline violence and aggravating pre-existing conflicts, whether on a large scale or a micro scale, in Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar. And as we've already heard today, disinformation is manifesting and eroding the democratic process in unique ways here in Indonesia also. So in light of the evidence that we have now, seeing disinformation has resulted in serious consequences, including polarization, conflict and public consciousness. We're asking two questions today. So how are institutions in Indonesia responding to the impacts of disinformation and the rise of synthetic media? And how well equipped is the public to recognize truths and develop or renew trust in media institutions? So for the past few weeks, I've been meeting with a whole range of stakeholders across government institutions, academia, religious groups, UN agencies, students, women's groups, policy advocates and the private sector to understand how they're responding to disinformation in Indonesia. What we've seen globally is that all sectors and all stakeholders are responsible for creating an environment in which disinformation can flourish, and so therefore all sectors need to respond. And I'm coming to the end of my trip with a sense that although the forces and the consequences of disinformation is growing in complexity and in scale, I do have hope that the institutions I spoke to, including organisations like Mafindo and its partners, that they recognise the gravity of the problem, have worked extremely quickly in the last 2 years and have been proactive within their means and their mandate in combating it. So today I'd like to give an overview of some policy interventions implemented by various sectors, and in addition some key areas of concern that these stakeholders have expressed. So a lot of these interventions are probably very familiar to all of you in the room, but I hope my presentation will at least knit together some of these interventions and you can see how they work side by side, and you can see, I guess, the time scale in that the last 2 years is really when this work has ramped up and where to go from here. So, start with the government response. As we know, the mandate of disinformation and tackling it does lie with the Ministry of Communications and Information. And the relationship between social media and the government ministries have been something of a love-hate one. Facebook was instructed to open its office here in Indonesia in 2014, given the company had been operating in the market for many, many years. It was a surprise at the time, given it had been working here for many years, and the issue of disinformation was already on the rise. So in 2018, Facebook has almost faced criminal sanctions when police investigated the company for data breaches also. But without applications like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, on which Indonesia has come to rely, I think that the e-commerce sector would certainly suffer, and the entire system of how institutions operate would suffer. So the government has taken a three-tiered approach to responding to disinformation. One is digital literacy, one is law enforcement, and three is blocking content. On the approach of digital literacy, are we familiar with Cyberkreasi? Have we heard of Cyberkreasi? It's a 90 institution strong movement promoting digital literacy around the country. Most of those institutions are from private sector, academia, Mafindo is a part of it as well. There's a whole range of digital literacy advocates as part of this movement. These institutions are mostly based in Jakarta but operate outside Java also. I've met a number of Cyberkreasi advocates voluntarily doing great work in their community, and it's difficult to measure given that it's voluntary and it's underfunded. Challenges remain for the coalition, as under general legislation, while it's positioned under ComInfo, it doesn't receive funding for specific projects. So they produce tools, learning materials for institutions to be able to use in their own communities. I believe if cybercriasi could be institutionalised and really well-resourced, scaled up and developed into a nationwide program, I think we would see huge results with regard to digital literacy. On law enforcement, I'm not going to dive too deeply into the legal frameworks used to prosecute offenders of disinformation and hate speech, but I think we can agree that current legislation is not keeping up. And I will share that across the sector, including within national government agencies, it was of the opinion of many people I spoke to that law enforcement and a criminal approach to disinformation should be the last resort. Digital literacy should be number one. And the elasticity of the law, especially Law 19 of the 2016 amendments of the Information Technology Law, threatens freedom of speech and expression and therefore limits criticism of institutions. When there's fear of defamation, there is a limited criticism of particular institutions. Government institutions I spoke to, however, did not believe the law should be reformed in any way. On the topic of content blocking, it's been explained to me a number of ways how ComInfo's process of monitoring and blocking fake news, so I'll try to explain in the most comprehensive way. ComInfo's unit is using software mechanism known as Cyberdrone 9, which includes artificial intelligence that trawls the internet for all kinds of negative content. This includes pornography, content that threatens national security, fake news. The reports that come out of the machine learning is then verified by people and then submitted to relevant platforms for removal. Relevant platforms being Facebook, Google, etc. The digital platforms I spoke to, they said they don't always comply with the content if the content is within the law and the legislation of the country and within the community guidelines. So key concerns around this approach expressed by advocacy groups is firstly, due to the lack of legislative definitions around fake news, criticism of the government, hate speech, disinformation, lies, spin, propaganda. As we can see from my fellow panelists up here, we can see that there's a whole range of content out there and it's very difficult to define it. However, Mafindo do have two key definitions around what disinformation is. Secondly, the lack of transparency around what is reported and what is removed. So we don't actually know what is being reported and what is removed from the internet. I think there is still room for open transparency around this. And the absence of an independent body in this monitoring mechanism does open up possibility for bias in informing state censorship. The private sector response, I think, has been swift and impactful in the last 2 years. Generally across the major tech giants, the general flavour is these 5 points. So advancing critical digital literacy, making quality count, so rewarding quality news items in search results. This is different between Google search and YouTube, however. Giving users more context and choice, making community guidelines a lot more aware to users. Stakeholder coordination and inter-partner communication. This has been, I think, really effective. Mafindo, I think you can see as a result of this work, and combating spammy behaviour. So I'm going to start with Facebook. So Facebook opened up in Indonesia in 2014, as we discussed before. At the time, Indonesia ranked number 4 in the world in Facebook use. I believe it's number 3 now. I need to double check that. I don't want to spread fake news. So the biggest reason for the office to open at the time was small to medium enterprises, advancing the advertising space and creating access to those who weren't already on board with Facebook. So that's also including the Free Basics program. You may or may not be familiar with that, but in many areas in the country where people have access to a handphone but they're not able to afford data, they're still able to access Facebook using a data-free program. So jumping forward to 2019, and the narrative has changed a lot since the company first arrived in Indonesia. It's been under immense fire globally to create a fairer ecosystem for developing democracies and economies. Most recently, you might have heard that Facebook has banned foreign-funded ads. Facebook's also prohibited foreign-funded ads in elections in Nigeria and also Ukraine elections. I'm yet to find out exactly what this means, but I hope to report back in upcoming research. It took effect last week, although I think it's to be commended. I do wonder if it's a little bit too late, given that we're just a month away from the elections, and perhaps some of the damage has already been done. Around coordination, Facebook has been facilitating coordination between government agencies and media groups quite effectively, and as a result of the coordination, concerns and challenges have been highlighted, and this is a positive thing. Mainly with government mechanisms in place to give Facebook clear and efficient ways to respond, and lack of synchronizations across government agencies, lack of definitions around what negative content is, creates difficulty for Facebook to respond effectively. Digital literacy. Facebook has also conducted digital literacy campaigns around the country. I don't have an example of it, but one example is a full-page ad in Compass recently with the questionable emoji, which was "do this before you share," which I liked. Fact-checking. Obviously, fact-checking is an important aspect of Facebook's operations, as Mafindo expressed before. And limiting forward capability on WhatsApp, user ability to forward content to more than 5 people or groups. However, groups can still contain hundreds of people, I think up to 256 if I'm not mistaken. So some people who we've spoken to as part of current election campaigns have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups and hundreds of people in those groups. So being able to forward content to just 5 of those groups still spreads content quite widely. Still, there's an effort there to limit virality, potential for virality of content. Research. WhatsApp has also invested $1 million in research across academic institutions worldwide, including in Indonesia, related to issues of digital literacy use and misuse of the platforms. And I hope that this research is widely made available for government and for policymakers in Indonesia once it's completed and once it's released, and not just for the private sector use. Google. Google in the last 2 years has really ramped up efforts to remove monetary incentives serving hateful or demeaning content. Disinformation has come in the form of paid ads on Google across various websites for about a decade. So it's nice to see this has finally happened. It's not 100% clean. I think that there's still a lot that needs to be done, but there's definitely an effort there. It's expressed that it's working on 4 key areas, including increased use of machine learning to identify damaging content, and more independent human experts, including fact-checkers, tougher stance on controversial videos, and expanding counter-radicalization efforts. Google has also released a white paper recently, which is an interesting read on how they expect to work towards tackling disinformation. But I encourage all civil society groups and policymakers in all countries in which Google operates to hold them to account. So online there's also I don't have it actually here, I think I've got the wrong slide, but online there is Google's accountability report, which shows a dramatic increase in the amount of content that's been removed in the last year. Google show this content once a year. Maybe not enough, but it's still a good effort in terms of transparency. In 2018 there was under 1,000 pieces of content that the government requested that was removed successfully as requested by the government. 23% of the content was the name of national security, 14% religious offence, and 14% violence, and 13% adult content, which I think is really interesting given the amount of content that's requested for removal. I think most of it is adult content. So as I said before, Google doesn't always remove content that's requested of them. On the topic of Twitter, Indonesia has long been referred to as one of the world's Twitter users, and according to Twitter Indonesia, however, while this is true because of scale and population size, most active Twitter users are educated, middle class, and still relatively small compared to other platforms. I'd like to compare this to the data. Also, according to Twitter, the nature of the platform is not comfortable for spreaders of disinformation, given that Twitter is the environment is conducive to call-out culture. So you post something and then people can immediately debunk the hoax. And that nature of being immediately able to respond to hoaxes. Twitter has responded to disinformation in 3 key ways, which is firstly a technical approach in identifying spammy behaviour regardless of the content. So that means relatively it's about bots. So if there are fake accounts that their algorithms are able to monitor, they're able to curb that behaviour. At the same time, this doesn't take into consideration the nature of buzzers, and there's a really great article recently published by Reuters that's quite in-depth, I believe that Ross is quoted in it, about buzzers in Indonesia. And Twitter isn't very able to monitor those buzzers or curb their behaviour because they're run by people, not necessarily bots. They're also updating rules in terms of services and vigorously communicating this with users. Whether users pay attention to those terms, services and privacy guidelines, that's another question. Public engagement and digital literacy, particularly among brands and institutions, on risk management. On the topic of civil society, there's an enormous range of great organisations, often underfunded, often working extremely hard and made up of volunteers, trying to tackle disinformation. So I've divided, I guess, into 4 areas. The work that they're mainly doing is digital literacy, research, counter-narrative and advocacy. As I mentioned, digital literacy and the Ciberkreasi movement is made up of many civil society organisations, many young, great active advocates who are working on Instagram to promote counter-narratives and debunk hoaxes. I believe Mafindo is also made up of hundreds of volunteers as well. Japalili, I believe, is a network of academics, which some of you might already be aware of, promoting digital literacy through universities. It's kind of modelled on, it's similar to Ciberkreasi, but it's more in the academic space. Research, there's a huge range of research that academic institutions are producing, but I think there's a lot of potential for that content to be mined by policymakers. Counter-narrative, I also spoke with some religious Nahdlatul Ulama, NU Fatayat, and also Pesantren in Cirebon and Jakarta about how disinformation is not just about the elections and how it has been actively targeting headmasters and attempting to destabilise the fabric of the Pesantren institutions. Islami.co is also another great platform promoting counter-narratives and peaceful content in nature. Media institutions, I know that I don't want to go over time, so I'm just going to speed through this, but there's been a huge effort in the last 2 years to strengthen media institutions and verification of news content being produced, including the strengthening of Indonesian Press Council and their capacity to verify online media. Up until I believe a year or 2 years ago, they did not have representation of cyber in online media. The formation and the inclusion of the Indonesian Cyber Media Network is now a big part of the Press Council. So what this includes is competence tests for journalists accredited by the Press Council to verify quality reporting, and outlets and reporters not verified may not receive the same Press Council protections. And then there's also been a lot of cross-learning engagement between digital platforms and journalists and media outlets. So, it's been 3 weeks of talking to a lot of people, and if anybody in the room here still would like to contribute to some solutions and ways forward related to policy and developing a 5-year action plan for tackling disinformation in Indonesia, I'd be very happy to speak to you, and I love your inputs. But in summary, I think as institutions reform policy for the next era of the information crisis, and we look beyond the elections, the key areas of concern include resources, coordination between agencies, civil society, and mining the quality of work coming out of academic institutions, human rights approaches to ensure press freedom, freedom of expression, and positive internet use. There's still wide knowledge gaps in how to protect data, define disinformation, and stop buzzers. I don't have solutions for that. So I think also, as some of my experience has shown, that a lot of the content that doesn't fall under what we know as hoax or disinformation is really, really difficult to define. So I do think there's a whole section of disinformation that's extremely gendered as well, and I think there's a big room for research there. A lot of groups are concerned about content that's promoting anti-vaccinations and health concerns, also, yeah, I spoke to one student who for example, she said that she received her first handphone from her parents a year ago, and she's been trawling the internet, looking for information and learning about the world, and she came across an Instagram account where there were facts about the world, and she came across one item of information that said if she spends 24 hours awake, she's going to get HIV, she's going to contract HIV, and she then forwarded that, she's 14, she forwarded that to her friends, and then their friends needed to verify with their parents. How do you define that form of disinformation, and how do you monitor it? I think that digital literacy is the answer and needs to be heavily resourced. Superkreasi have a number of resources online on their website about what data protection means in Indonesia, what digital literacy and digital parenting means. UNESCO has also developed a digital literacy global framework project to develop methodology that can serve as the foundation of the SDGs. And these are the key components of the digital literacy framework. So thank you so much, Terima kasih banyak. I hope I didn't go over time. There's a lot to cover. Thank you so much to my panelists.
Thank you, Isabel. I think there are lots of issues that could be discussed further, and I think the three panelists have shown the flavors of disinformation. Masaji have started off with the diversity of issues of disinformation, and Ross has started in his presentation that he will be controversial, so let's debate him, let's disagree with him. He has explained about the polarizing campaign, which is quite seemingly boring and no clear direction for the country's future. And lastly, Isabel has explained a wide range of response and mechanism to curb down disinformation, which is of course still full of challenges, especially in measuring its effectiveness. Now I would like to invite the floor for question and answers or comments. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll take 4 first. Please state your name and your affiliation, starting from.
Hello. Can I just speak?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can I just speak? I would like to ask the different questions to all the panelists. My name is Surya from Islamic University of North Sumatra, Medan. For Pak Setiaji, we came late. I and my wife came late, so we don't know that you have presented this. I read that you and Mafindo were creating something called WhatsApp Hoax Buster, but the version is still a Chrome extension. As you know, most people access WhatsApp through Android or iPhone, or in essence, smartphone. So do you have a smartphone version? If not, what's the difficulty? Is it because of WhatsApp API? And for us, I see that your Google Scholar profile, and glad to find out that you're an expert on media, especially in Indonesia. What do you think of the analysis that mainstream media is also propagator of hoax or fake news? For example, many scholars analyzing the US media have said that social media news popularity is possible because mainstream media like New York Times and Washington Post were not reporting reality but slanted towards a certain candidate. In Indonesia, this is especially worrying due to media ownership concentration, as I think you have covered in your books and works here. So what do you think about that? And to Isabel, in Medan we have developed something, it's called Telaah Online. In essence, I think you'll be very happy with it because it answers some of your requests. But I would just like to ask, we would like to send you that thing, but can you read Indonesian?
masih belajar bahasa Indonesia, but send it anyway, and I have a lot of...
Because you can, then I don't need to translate it. So thank you, that's all for me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pak Surya. Next. Bapak.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Gibran Derajat and I'm an International Relations lecturer at the President University in Jakarta. Sorry about this. I do have one question to Dr. Was Tamso. You said that this year's election is characterized by disjuncture between timid campaign of two candidates wherein they lack ideological discourse among one another and also heated exchange between the two supporters. Through that logic, would it be fair to say that this year's election is increasingly moving towards personality politics rather than a rational choice election wherein the voter behavior is now deciding rather on the personal attachment they have towards certain candidates and not the policy position that they're offering? Thank you.
Next.
Thank you very much. I'm a man on the street on this ICT issues, but I'm an old school, and I believe on the Chatham House rules. And in my family, in order to prevent hoaxes, I use the rules. It's Hadrianto rules, my name. I'm a former diplomat. So no cell phone during we are waiting order in the cafeteria, and no cell phone during our dinner course or family gathering, because this is important. And be rational in confronting with hoax or issues. Because, you know, as an old school, of course you're all aware that we are already penetrated by something like tang-tang, asterisks. And this is a kind of imagination. If you, every day you swallow hoaxes, you will believe that asterisk is reality. The so-called fiction or fictionalized or fabricated news will become reality if you always swallow it or confront it day by day. That's my point. And I'm agreeable with Rostastal that this, in lieu with the 2019 election, I think the hashtag 2019 Ganti Presiden is nothing ideological. I don't believe whatsoever happened with the Prabowo win, Indonesia will change into Salafi. I don't think so. I know that precisely. But we have to be careful also with that kind of penetration ideology from outside. And the reality now, we have to accept it. Whether being created to change anything, created to change the situation, Jokowi is 50% more and Prabowo is 32%. That's the reality. So whether every or the follower of other faction, I'm not campaigning now, yeah. But this is the reality what I understand in my family and in my group. So I think the most important thing to confront the hoax is be rational and be cautious. That's the most important. I'm an old school, so you don't need to practice any theoretical framework and anything. But be cautious, be smart, to confront hoax, read carefully, etc., etc. Thank you very much.
See one more hand in the back. Oh, is that?
Yeah, it's a Flutterboard.
Can you use the mic?
All right, Seth Soderborg from Harvard and CSIS Sydney. I just have a question for Ross. I agree with most of what you said, Ross, and I'm just sort of curious whether, given given all the things, all the speech that are considered crimes under the criminal code, and all the ways in which campaign speech can get you in trouble under the very broad libel laws, and also all the KPU restrictions on what can be on your poster, when you can say what, and whether or not it can be negative in any way. I guess I'm curious whether, in your view, it's actually legal to have an ideological debate, but sort of more generally, whether part of what we're seeing as, I mean, this campaign has had a lot of libel cases brought against candidates. And I guess I'm wondering if part of what you're observing is people correctly understanding that campaigning very seriously is a good way to find yourself in court.
Okay, thanks, Seth. I think there are questions directed to all the panelists, but let me give the first opportunity to Isabel. What's the first one? Okay, maybe bye.
Okay. To Pak Kipan. Yeah, actually, Mafido is creating a kind of API called Udistira. So actually, it is a kind of preset connecting everything like our database. And then if you see the Check Fakta initiative, also using the Udistira. And we were using also Udistira for the first versions of the WhatsApp Hoaxbuster tools. They're using the Chrome extensions. But now we are working directly using the WhatsApp API. So we have been met with the representative from the WhatsApp from United States, and we are now still day to day working into releasing these applications. So it works like that. If you receive any information, then you can direct into specific number, and then it will connect into the database. First, we are doing manually. The computer will match manually, but the next we hope that we can Google also helping us to get some kind of artificial intelligence, so that using the NLP, so that it can help the chatbot can make easily or make the answer better. So, and I would like, that's the question, the answer for Mr. Gibran, and I would like to respond to Pak Adrianto. The situation, I think, people now quite aware that hoax is dangerous. I think because everybody talk hoax, and the Indonesian police, they spread a lot of campaign in the ground. The problem now we having is actually people still don't know to distinguish which one is the truth, which one is the fake. So the lack of skills, and the problem is most of in the ecosystem of hoax that we examine, actually it deals a lot with the digital immigrants, people with 35 years old and older. So those are actually the main problems that we are dealing with. The young people, they are not really, because they live in the different space. They live not in the Facebook, they don't have Twitter, they live more in the Instagram. Instagram is quite free, there's not very a lot of misinformation spreading there. But of course, the young people also, of course, have the problems that they also don't have the quite skills to distinguish the information. So what we are doing now, in part of the Cybercrazy initiative to make a digital literacy, is that we try to make a kind of immunizations programs for the youngster, and we need to make a kind of a lot of campaign, a lot of workshop to Dharma Wanita, to PKK, to pengajian, to something like that, to understand. If you see some kind of photo with captions, how do you to make sure the caption is true or not? Skills is the thing that we need to talk in actually. So I think those my response. Thank you.
But I just wanted to say thank you for recognizing Chatham House rules. It's very nice to hear. But today's discussion is not under Chatham House rules, because I believe we're live streaming. Yeah. But I'd like to echo Mas Aji's sentiments about how young people are interacting with social media, and I'm a millennial, but I'm definitely in the older section of millennial, and I can tell you that there's a whole generation younger who are using not just the applications that we're aware of, but there's a whole range of other applications that are developing, and there's a whole range of independent media outlets that are popping up and propagating, and it's become synonymous with real life, and people are spending, I believe, between 6 to 8 hours a day on social media, and using all kinds of content. And this content filters in so many different ways, and I think this is just going to become more and more complex. So I really appreciate the rules in your family and this strong sense of digital parenting, and I hope that this sentiment can be promoted in other families through digital literacy tools. So thank you.
Thank you for your questions. The first point about mainstream media propagating hoax news, and I think you were saying this earlier, that often the social media content can get sucked into mainstream media content, and that is concerning. But also of concern is the way in which there are a number of sites which are created which pretend to be a mainstream media site, which are not actually mainstream media, but they sound like they should be. So instead of Republica, .co.id, it will be Republica with a C instead of a K, and then they look like they're a mainstream news site and it gets spread around. But the big issue is that trust in mainstream media is declining. We know that, and we know that the 2014 election was a big cause of that, from the TV1, saying that Prabowo won the election, from Metro TV campaigning for Jokowi. So that trust in mainstream media has declined, which means people turn to alternative sources of information, which means they're more susceptible to hoax news and disinformation tactics. But to go back to my central point, I think the no contest is also clear in the mainstream media in Indonesia at the moment. Haritano is now in Jokowi's coalition. Erick Thohir is now in Jokowi's coalition as his campaign manager. Rizal Bakri's receded to the background, and Golkar is now part of coalition. So TV1 has changed. So there is not really a contest in mainstream media at the moment. The second question was about personality politics versus party position. Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you that really we are, and that has always been an element of Indonesian politics and any presidential style campaign, be it America, Italy, Brazil, wherever. Personality politics matters. But I think in this current election, that's what Jokowi wants. It's his strongest card, his personality. He's popular. That and infrastructure. If he could run a campaign on infrastructure, and we only talk about infrastructure, he'd be happy. But aside from that, personality is the main issue that he can win on, because he is more popular than Prabowo, and people like him. And so I don't think that there is an attempt to have a lot of serious policy discussions beyond infrastructure. In 2014, the activists and the democratic reformers gave him a platform. He didn't have one, remember? He had Revolusi Mental, which no one really knew what that was, but everybody sort of supported it. So a lot of people got on board and said, you are the democratic reformer, and he ran with it. They're not doing that this time around. Why? Because we could debate why, and we know why. So that sort of leaves a personality contest in which there isn't a policy discussion. Final point then is, and by the way, on Prabowo's side, when you look at the polling on Prabowo, there's a hardcore 25% of people who will vote for Prabowo no matter what. He can have lunch with Habib Rizek, he can swear, he can step on graves or whatever it is, and they will still vote for Prabowo. He has always had that strong support base. What he can't do is get it above 32-33%, because he basically can't find any policy difference to argue over. Or so it would seem so far. So, and the final question was about libel cases, and is this, are we looking at a democracy now, or an election campaign where people are more scared to campaign because they're worried about libel cases and court cases? Potentially, it's early days, but potentially, and I think the general liberal view in Indonesia that it's good to crack down on those who create disunity through undang-undang ITE or through Ahmadani type cases, or Habib Rizek is the anti-pornography law case. That suggests that a lot of liberal Indonesians are quite happy to see libel cases used to crack down on disunity, which means you get more of an environment where the legal system is injected into a campaign. But it's early days. Okay, maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, I would like to open for the second round for Q&A. Ibu, number one, Mas Gerkan, and Mas. Silakan.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nuri Distuti. I'm from the Coordinating Ministry for Political, Legal and Security Affairs. I got two questions for all the panelists. Related to the hoax on terrorism, at the moment there is a dilemmatic situation where the real coverage of terrorism incidents, such as the recent Sibolga blast and Surabaya bombing last year, is what the terrorists want. That is to cause fear in people's life. But without real coverage, the hoax will be just even more wild and uncontrollable. What do you suggest the government and the journalists and the people should do to tackle this dilemma? And the second one, related to buzzer. We know that they sometimes, most of them are using fake identity, and they are paid by both of the candidates' followers or supporters. Seeing this as a gray phenomenon and gray area in front of the law, what are your opinions about this buzzer phenomenon? Because all our opinions and preferences are are influenced by buzzers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Video. I just have one question for Isabel regarding your statement before on regarding on the government approach to tackle the hoax or fake news. Yeah, that you said that you prefer on the government rely on the digital literacy rather than the law enforcement. I quite supportive to that, but I'm not quite sure if that can be effective in Indonesia, considering on recent survey, I forgot, I think Indobarometer or one pollster which has research findings shows that the majority of Indonesia they like hoax as far as it benefit their presidential candidate. Yeah, so and it disregard their educational background or the professional background. So this is a challenge for Indonesia because such majority of people, other than those swing voters, they like the hoax as far as benefit their presidential candidate. Even they like to share it as a part of propaganda to their peers in order to attract their support. This is something that we may brainstorm about it. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing your insights today. My name is Yos Kanawas, and I'm from Northwestern University. My question is actually related to the previous questions. What is unclear to me right now is to what extent hoax and disinformation cause change on voting behavior. Like maybe hoax, as the previous question asked, hoax would harden the belief of the core supporters, but what about the undecided voters, and to what extent hoaxes alter the belief of those who already decided who are they going to support? So, like, do we have information on that, and what is the mechanism if they change their behavior? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. On the topic of tackling buzzers, I don't think that there is an answer at the moment, but I do think that the digital platforms need to take this a lot more seriously, because they do have the data in being able to track where the buzzers are and their behaviour. This challenge is when the buzzers are using VPNs and they're not able to be geotagged and located, and that's when it creates a whole lot of complications for monitoring them and their behaviour. But I do believe that the digital platforms in Indonesia immediately do need to respond to it and quickly. And as I said, the article in Reuters has outlined, I guess, some evidence that they do exist, but we still don't know how many or how wide scale they are. On the question about the hoax and the panic that's created and around terrorist events, I think that encouraging greater independent reportage on those events is the answer, and strengthening media institutions and more independent online reporting. But yeah, it's a challenge. On law enforcement, whether it's the best way forward and how the nature of, I agree with you, it's the nature of using hoax as a tool, as a democratic tool. It's almost become so normal that people like sharing it because they know it works. And whether law enforcement is the best way forward. Well, the number of people that I spoke to in the government agencies believe that law enforcement should be the last resort, and neutralising hoaxes should have far more effort poured into that. So, for example, you might remember that I believe it was a ulama, I can't remember where, but he was promoting that eggs were fake and from China, and you shouldn't buy eggs from this particular pasar. Rather than the treatment of law enforcement, I believe that local police encouraged him to come out and say, actually, the eggs from this pasar are real, and you should buy them. So that was a countering, neutralising approach rather than a law enforcement approach. I'm not saying that law enforcement is not should be done away with completely, but as we can see in a global trend, in Europe particularly, law enforcement is becoming less of a priority, and digital literacy and greater pressure on the digital platforms, much more pressure on the digital platforms in Europe than we're seeing in Indonesia to resolve this issue is taking place. And treatment of criminal code and implementation of the criminal code is less of a priority. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Does hoax news change voting behaviour? What will it do for undecided voters? Excellent question, and I think worth thinking about. Again, my argument is that the polls have stayed the same, and so whatever buzzers and hoax news creators, disinformation tactics have tried to swing undecided voters, so far it has not changed the polls. If we believe that the polls are all legitimate, and I'm going on legitimate polls here. So let me ask you this, if there is going to be a disinformation style campaign, which, as I've argued, has to be more ideological because people sort of have to believe it, what would it be? What would change undecided voters, which would be a hoax news campaign? And Jokowi's PKI message, that has ideological tendencies, of course, because of the history of communism and conflict in Indonesia, but they've tried that. Jokowi as anti-Islamic, of course, incredibly ideological and fervent, but they've tried that. So what's the next thing? If I'm wrong and hoax news is going to change the election, what's going to be the message that works? I can't see one coming, but I'd be interested if somebody else has a theory or an idea that there is still a possibility for that happening.
Thank you. For the first question for Ibu Nuri about the dilemma of the creating news about terrorists. Actually, last week I just had a sarasehan or silaturahmi. It is a kind of meeting a lot of people in one place, eating snacks together to have discussions. And I was the moderator, and one of the panelists was Ali Fauzi. Ali Fauzi is the brother of Amrozi. He was one of the proprietor of Bali Port, but now he works as the peacemaker. Even actually, he has a yayasan that specifically helps to deradicalize the mantan napiter, the former former terrorists. So his voice is very strong. I mean that when he said that he can convince people that usually try to, to make a gray area, try to delegitimate, just like when we had a tamrin bomb. A lot of people said that this is set up by the government to do something, then, and we need to get his voice as soon as possible, yeah, to at least to make sure that the terrorism is real in Indonesia. So we have to make sure real. But I think it is interesting to see the reaction of the people when we got the tamrin bomb. We make it receh. I mean that how to mean in English, you know it. Undermine together, and we show unity. One hashtag was uniting us. It was kami tidak takut. So using this kind of a campaign together between the communities and also the government, the effect of the tamrin bomb is diminished very quickly. I mean that we hope that this kind of showing unity and trying not to glorify also voicing a lot of former members of terrorists could help us to deal with these issues. And about the buzzers, in my opinion, a buzzer is not always bad. I mean that we also get a lot of help from buzzers. For example, for the pariwisata in English is tourism. Sorry, I'm Japanese. My Japanese is better than my English, of course. So in Indonesia, we had a community called GNP, in some province that help us to help the tourism effect. If we get a kind of international vote for example, Komodo or Borobudur, we always won because of help of these buzzers. So buzzer is not always bad, but of course if we talk about the politics, sometimes of course they try to mislead. And what we encourage now is actually for diminishing the negative content related to political or others, we try to engage people to do, we call Siskamli digital, digital, because every platform already try to make sure people that if you see the negative content, please report. Facebook has just recently, last June, releasing the standard community standard. So now we can understand what can we share that violates the Facebook standard. What we cannot share that. So this is something that we need to learn also. So that is our Siskamli digital is one way to reduce the negative content. Mavindo is now at one of the third-party fact checker, but we are also being the one of the trusted partner for Facebook. So if any content that could lead to violence, for example, we can directly ask Facebook to take down. So it's not only government. So they are opening more channels so that because I think Facebook is running a lot of cases from Myanmar. They are being a lot of blames to Facebook because of the conflict in Myanmar, and they are now having a kind of several initiatives to do something like that. So Siskamli digital is maybe one of the answers that we are doing now. I think that's thank you.
We should end by 11:30, so maybe if there are one quick question, comments, because people are prepared for their Friday prayer. Okay, one more, please. Be brief, sir.
Thank you. My name is Faris from Jakarta Research Institution. I have a question for Mas Aji. After you do the Siskamli digital and from the name, I think you do some kind of censorship or overcome the hoaxes after you detect the hoaxes and you explain to them that's the correct information. What will you do? Because I think it's just like for me like censorship, but it makes people cannot continue the debate. All we do, I think, the healthy public space for debate, like some kind of like damage control. Because from Ross' point, most of them I agree. Like polarization are engineered by social media team, social media machine, buzzers, social media army, etc. And the discourse are also engineered by them. One team produce a material, some disinformation material, and the other team will try to overcome it. So the discourse so the discourse is for the social media campaign. For the social media army that the public, so that's the lack of public space for healthy debate, public space for arguing, for questioning. People are just consumers from the government, from the social media team, from the disinformation producer. That's what's popped on my mind from this discussion. Actually, particularly for Mas Aji, after you detect some hoaxes and you overcome, and what will you do to continue your educational works?
Thank you for the questions. What we do is actually, what we can fact check is if there is information that contradict any fact. So we cannot fact check opinion. Opinions cannot be fact checked. Yeah. So we need to respect opinions, how harsh it is, but we have to learn how to respect opinion. So of course, not many people in Indonesia understand to distinguish between argument using data and creating opinion. But even actually, we are also still learn about it. But at least what we agree is that we cannot absolutely fact check any opinion. Opinion should be free as much as possible. And the second one is, if we do find a kind of misinformation, hoaxes in the social media, like the Facebook, there are quite a few options that we can take. For example, the misinformations that could lead to violence, then we can report to be removed, because it could lead to violence. But if just any misinformation, this is false, and usually the content is not removed, it is still there, but there is a kind of flag, it is flagged. So I think in one of my slides there's a kind of view in a Facebook, if there is a wrong article, and then in the bottom there is like a related articles from, it could be from one of the 5 third-party Facebook fact checkers, either from Mafindo, from Tirto, from Tempo, from Kompas. So people can still decide. Even actually they can still share. But if they want to share this misinformation, there is it is now they got a warning that this information is already verified. This is wrong information that, but you can still forward it. So this one, and what we are doing is actually, this is actually in the space of the fact-checking efforts. But of course, we also need to think not only about the fact-checking efforts, but the digital literacy that Isabel already explained. I think this is very important. But I want to say that digital literacy, it takes a longer time. I mean that we can only see maybe more than 5 or 10 years or 20 years the result of this digital literacy. But of course we have to make it, because if not, we are going to enter the bonus demography. What happens to the Indonesia if we don't do it? But the shortcut that we are doing now, actually, to make a kind of top-bottom approach. We learn from Ambon case. Ambon is a town that we had a war between Muslim and Christian since from 1999 to 2005. 5,000 people died. But now, if we go to Ambon and we talk to the people there, the people in Ambon, they are exceptionally have a kind of resistance of misinformations. Why is that? Because if there is any hoax, any misinformations that create a concerns to the people, the elite, the political, the religious leaders between Muslim and Christian, they will work together to stop this. So we call it the Pranata Sosial, social structure in Ambon is working. And we also tried this mechanism when we faced the government election last year in Pontianak. So we create a called the Hoax Crisis Center. So it's basically to make a kind of ecosystem, joining together people that have influences, like political leaders, the government, the religious leaders, having a kind of ecosystem together. If there is a kind of misinformation, then we have to fight it together. And it worked in the Pontianak case. So we are hoping that we are working now in Jawa Barat and also in Jogja, using this kind of also top-down approach to help, to make it a faster approach. Because in Indonesia, a lot of people have a kind of a pattern. I mean that they believe the specific people. They believe they're saying faster than if anybody else saying. So this is the approach that I think it should work, because Indonesia is quite different to other countries. We still have norm, we still have the religious communities, and especially the MUI, the KWI, they already also have some kind of fabrics that help us to deliver this kind of digital literacy in this like in the mosque, in the church. So we have a lot of potential possibilities actually to work in this. Thank you.
I think it's quite ironic, Mas Haji, do we need to face such strategy in order to society resilience could be built like an Ambon? Such a traumatic experience, then the society resilience could be built. But for the other areas, we hopefully would never face such tragedy. But how could resilience be built without experiencing such a tragic moment? Yes. So I think we have come to the end of our discussion. I think I'm not going to summarize anything, but I think the panelists have presented all the facts on this information. So I think it's a wait-and-see period now. Will there be more issues of disinformation? Will the statistic which Mas Adi presented increase or decrease? If it decreases, it means that what Isabel proposed with all her mechanism is absolutely working, both regulatory and non-regulatory measurement. So in this case, I would like to end the discussion this morning, and I would like to thank all the three panelists for their comprehensive presenting, and let's all give a big applause to the three panelists. And I would like to invite all of you for lunch in the room next door. Thank you.
Yes.